Good afternoon and welcome to the Midday Mull for Monday, the 11th of May. In the readings today, we're reading from Isaiah chapter 9 into verse 10. Isaiah 9 has that famous Christmas passage of the prophecy, "To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders." Those wonderfully encouraging words. But if we continue reading the chapter, it turns into a message of judgment on Israel. And in 12b you have the following: "Yet for all of this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised," talking about God. And he says that people have not turned. He's sent the judgment, but they still haven't turned. And it says, "Therefore God will take no pleasure in the young men, nor will he pity the fatherless and widows, for everyone is ungodly and wicked. Every mouth speaks vileness." And again, "Yet for all of this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised." And it continues, "Surely wickedness burns like a fire, it consumes briars and thorns, it sets forest thickets ablaze," and it continues and repeats, "Yet for all of this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised." Woe to those who make unjust laws, who issue oppressive decrees, who deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed and the widow. And it continues, "Yet for all of this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised." And I thought the notion of a God where we say, "For all of this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised," is so foreign to our 21st century view of God. And yet if we start cutting back on the notion of an angry God, a God who will be angry at sin and wickedness, we start diminishing the whole picture. And it speaks of wickedness as being like a fire. Wickedness burns like a fire and consumes briars and thorns. And one thinks of the wildfires we read and saw of in Australia. And you can see just how destructive fire unchecked is. And God's saying that's what wickedness is like. That's what wickedness does. It just expands and it will soon consume all sorts of people. And therefore it does need to be stopped. And we might think of the stopping of it and the judgment of it as an unpleasantness. But that is what God does. And if God isn't angry with wickedness and sin and doesn't judge it, the Easter stories makes no sense whatsoever. If we lose the notion of a God who justly judges evil, the rest of the Bible sort of unravels with it. And the good news is that, yes, God is angry at sin, and so should we be when we see people exploited and we see wickedness running rampant and the suffering that it causes. We too should be angry at that. And that God does judge it, and that at some point in the future all the scales will be leveled. But the great thing is that we are not left to deal with our own sinfulness, because we can't. And the wickedness that runs rampant doesn't just run rampant in society, it does so often in our lives as well, just slowly eats away and consumes us. And yet this is where the Easter story, the good news of grace, is so important. That God does judge evil, but when we couldn't help ourselves, he sent his Son to deal with it and to bear the judgment and to suffer the consequences and to redeem us. And that is good news indeed. May you know that good news, and may it give you courage and strength and a sense of your value in the eyes of God. Amen.